The game's over.
Welcome into Triple Zeros. I'm your host, Josh Buckhalter. Follow me on Twitter at JoshGBuck, on Facebook at JukesJumps. The website is jukesandjumpers.wordpress.com, and the email address is jukesjumps@gmail.com. We're going to jump right into it. A big weekend ahead of us. Wildcard weekend is just one day away. But before we get into that, the NFL announced, the Hall of Fame announced the finalists for the modern era class this week, and it's a list that's stacked with names. You got Troy Polamalu, Edgerrin James, Zach Thomas, Brian Young, Richard Seymour, John Lynch, Steve Atwater, Leroy Butler, Reggie Wayne, Torrey Holt, Isaac Bruce, Sam Mills, Tony Baselli, Alan Faneca, and Steve Hutchinson. That's a stacked list, and I had every intention of skipping some of those names on the way, but that didn't happen. I ended up ultimately having to go through all of them because the list is very stacked with a lot of solid names. So I'm just not sure that how you whittle it down. If I had to take a guess, a couple of them that might not make it the first time, Richard Seymour, or one of the newer or more recent players. Steve Hutchinson, maybe. He's right there on that borderline where you probably consider him. And then you got some of the other guys, Brian Young, and I'm probably just not having them fresh in my memory. Brian Young and maybe Leroy Butler. I'm not sure, but I know you have to put on Torrey Holt and Isaac Bruce because the greatest show on turf, the two receivers, the mainstay receivers from that era of the Rams, definitely has to be on there. I'm not sure how you don't put those two. You have to, basically, bottom line, point blank, period. That has to happen. That's just a very, very stacked list, top to bottom, though. Troy Polamalu is also one that I'm not sure he's going to get in his first time trying to make it, but that's a very, very strong class of finalists in the modern era, and we'll see how many of them ultimately make it in. But just when I was, like I said, I was going to read it and I was going to skip through a couple of them, but then I'm like, well, damn, you really can't, because there's a lot of strong names and everybody on there is deserving of ultimately ending up there, and they all will. But that's just, I don't know if I can recall a class where everybody on there seems so relevant, which is probably just a sign that I'm getting old, but that's neither here nor there. Moving on, though, to the more pressing matter, the more immediate impact matter, the wild card playoffs start this weekend. The wild card round of the playoffs starts this weekend, and we have 4 interesting matchups. I kind of covered them on the last episode. You can follow that on the YouTube channel. Go to Triple Zeros on YouTube. Subscribe so you can get alerts to the stream, and you can be here with me sharing these times. I kind of went over the matchups a little bit. I didn't really get too deep into them, but we're going to go a little bit more real quick. The first one is the Buffalo Bills and the Houston Texans. The Texans will be hosting. I do feel like the Bills can win this game, and it's because the Buffalo passing attack, it's not great, but it's effective enough that I think they can take advantage of that Houston secondary that, despite having multiple first-round picks throughout it, can really be picked apart. We've seen it, and we've seen that offense kind of struggle if things don't click early. They survive they thrive off of big plays, and as we know, Buffalo's defense is built to limit the big play. I can also see a situation where, because they are shut down in the passing game, because you're going to get Tre'Davious White on DeAndre Hopkins. Tre'Davious White hasn't allowed a touchdown in his coverage this year, and Hopkins, we've seen him and Watson have a little bit of struggles now and again connecting when teams do play that tight of coverage, and the Bills are a team that can play the tight of coverage. And then you have the 2 safeties in that secondary, Jordan Poyer and Micah Hyde, who both can play deep and don't let anything get behind them. So the question then becomes, can Houston rely on Carlos Hyde to carry the load against the Buffalo defense that can be run on? That's the question, and I'm not really sure that you want to be relying on him. And I guess it comes down to if any of the complementary receivers around DeAndre Hopkins are able to help and alleviate some of the pressure that's going to be on him, because he's going to get a lot of the attention in this game. Like I said, he's going to be draped by Tre'Davious White, and he might get some extra help over the top with some of the safeties in the back end. Who knows? Because Nuke is that guy, my favorite receiver in the game. But I just think that this is going to be a matchup there that, as much as I want to root for Watson and the Texans, I'm just not sure. This is my fear with them all the time. If they have these weaknesses that are kind of obvious and easy to expose, they're really a one-dimensional team where if Watson isn't able to pull off some magic for you, him and hopefully Nuke, sometimes he has to get done with others, which is a scraper, but if he can get it done with Nuke, if you can shut those two down, then you kind of have limited their options. And while Hyde has had a resurgence there this season, I'm not sure if he's had enough of one where you feel comfortable riding him to a victory in a playoff game, unless it's salting the game away already. Now, there are other members of the Buffalo secondary that can be had at a little bit easier than White, but I don't know if you can count on the other receivers in Houston to be there to take off that pressure, like I was saying. So that's the ultimate question there. I think this does end up being the upset. I think this is my upset of the weekend. I'm going to go with the Bills over the Texans in a stunner. Not one where the Bills look particularly great, but because I think the Texans are that flawed where their one dimension will be shut down and they'll be going to the early offseason. People will be questioning Bill O'Brien's job security and why they don't have a general manager and all those types of things. The next matchup is the New England Patriots, still in the AFC. New England Patriots taking on the Tennessee Titans. Earlier in the week, I was kind of waffling between thinking that the Titans could hold their own, and I wouldn't be surprised at either outcome in this game. But the more the week has gone on, the more I thought about it, and the more I looked into it, I'm not sure that the Titans can really pull this off. We've seen, like I said the last episode, Ryan Tannehill have this resurgence, and the Patriots do struggle with mobile quarterbacks. Now, Tannehill's not necessarily what you would call a runner, but he's a converted wide receiver in college, and he can move. And those type of passes have given the Patriots problems because they can't contain them, and they lose coverage. We also saw the past couple of weeks, or at least last week, Ryan Tannehill and Devontae Parker take advantage of Stephon Gilmore in coverage. Titans rookie A.J. Brown has been on a higgity, and that's a heater lately. And I'm not sure if Tannehill will have that same kind of courage to throw at Gilmore. You need the courage and you need the ball placement. That's one thing about Fitzpatrick. He gives you some of those oof plays, but that's why he's got the nickname Fitzmagic. He's going to give you some of those wild plays as well. And we saw some of those on the throws to Stephon Gilmore. A lot of people were arguing whether or not if it was if it was Parker who was exposing Gilmore or not, and I kind of just threw it out there like, is it that, or is it just that Fitzpatrick we know has zero care? There's no chill. My man is throwing where he's going to throw it, and if you catch it, you catch it. That's what's happened. He lives with the results. We saw that happen, and everybody's now kind of freaking out. Is Stephon Gilmore going to... Stephon Gilmore's still a lockdown, but every corner can be had, which can apply to that first matchup I was talking about, but sticking here, we're going to stay with this one. The thing about it is the Titans come in having rushed for over 100 yards in 8 straight games, and they have 2 other games. They've done that over 100 yards as a team in 12 of 16 games. And they had 2 other games where they ran for 97 yards and 91 yards. Clearly, they want to run the ball. Well, this game is in Foxborough, and only 2 teams have rushed for at least 100 yards this season. That was Dallas and Cleveland. I'm not sure that you're going to see the same level of effectiveness in this ground game that you see in other games, because what do we know about the Patriots defense? They take away your best weapon. If your best weapon is the run game, and that's what they had actually hung their hat on most of this season, you're probably going to be in for a long day. They're going to make Ryan Tannehill beat them. And then it doesn't get any easier there, because the only 300-yard passer that Patriots have allowed was Ryan Fitzpatrick in Week 17. Now, we know they didn't play the toughest schedule, but that's not the point. The point is it happened. It was only one 300-yard pass. So now you're telling me that you have to rely on Ryan Tannehill to do something that only Ryan Fitzpatrick was able to do. Now, aside from name, there's not too much similar in their playing styles, even though Tannehill has been tearing it up lately. I'm just not sure if you can count on him to go in there. Now, he has a solid record against New England. That's not the point. It's just this might be a moment where their time, the streak that they've been on, because, like I said, they've been on a heater since he's gotten in there. 7-3 as a starter. That's could possibly come to an end here, because now you are now taking the focus and putting it off the running game and putting it back onto Tannehill. A situation that we've seen when he's been forced to do things, at least in Miami, it didn't always work out so well. The next matchup, Saints-Vikings, Minnesota Miracle or All Saints Day. That's right. If it comes out there and they win this game and people start saying All Saints Day, I know I'm not. This is fine. That's a little TM, copyright mark, whatever you want to put up there in the circle. I do think that the Saints are going to come away with this one. Now, the X factor here is going to be Dalvin Cook. He sat out the last week of the season will he be healthy enough to be effective against the Saints defense that has had an up and down year? They have the talent. We know they can turn on at any point in time, but really this could be a game where the Saints at home take advantage of a Vikings defense that, while they still have a ferocious pass rush, their back end has been susceptible to some big plays, and we know that Drew Brees and Michael Thomas eat off of those type of secondaries. And then you have Jair Cook, who's been having a good year, and Traquan Smith splash plays every now and again. And of course, Alvin Kamara out of the backfield is always dangerous. I think that New Orleans is still very salty about what happened, and they're going to make sure that they don't let it happen again. You know that you can complain about how the refs missed the call against the Rams, but the whiff tackle against the Vikings might be something that haunts them for forever and ever. And I think the only way that you get to, I'm always a person who feels like the only way that you exercise those type of demons is when you go out and you take it back from that team. So this is the perfect chance for the Saints. They're at home, so they're in the comfort zone. Now Minnesota's a dome team too, so it's not like a great advantage, but it is at home, and we know the comforts of the confines of the Mercedes-Benz Dome, the New Orleans Superdome, how the Saints are able to play there as opposed to being on the road. But I do ultimately think that Dalvin Cook will be the X factor. His health, him and Alvin Kamara could have a showdown for the ages this weekend, but we'll just have to wait and see again how healthy Cook is after being so banged up for much of the year. And then the last matchup of the weekend will be the Seahawks taking on the Eagles. This one's kind of a toss-up. Both of these teams are very suspect because they're kind of decimated in a lot of areas. The Seahawks are down to Marshawn Lynch at running back. Now, if this was a couple of years ago, you'd be like, oh, snap, they got beast mode back, but this is Marshawn Lynch out of retirement. He did play last year, but that's not the point. He came out of retirement just this last week and got a few carries. It's more of a morale thing, I think. I think they're going to lean heavily on Russ when you get to the playoffs, and that kind of plays into this game because the Eagles, as everyone knows, are much tougher to run on than they are to pass on. That could lead to a showdown between two quarterbacks who have had some rocky moments this season. Russ was actually in the conversation for MVP for much of the year, but we saw him have a couple of questionable performances down the stretch against the 49ers, especially, where he just didn't look great at all. And now that they have to kind of switch up what they were doing, so I don't see them giving Marshawn Lynch and Robert Turbin and Travis Homer the amount of carries that they were giving to Chris Carson and Rashad Penny when they were both healthy. So this could be a switch in philosophy where they go back to a little bit more using Russ. But hopefully, if they do ultimately get there, I said that in a couple of episodes ago, actually, talking about dream Super Bowl matchups, and I would want to see the Ravens and the Seahawks, just because they're two similar defensive-oriented, run-based teams. See them get there, and then see the Seahawks give Marshawn Lynch that 1 yard go-ahead, get it in touchdown for the win for his career and let him walk off that way. That'd be great. That's just storybook stuff right there. I'm not sure, though, if they're going to be able to take out the Eagles because Carson Wentz has been playing very well of late. He's exercised a lot of his own demons, making it to the playoffs without Nick Foles around, and actually going to be the one to take them anywhere if they are to make it back to the Super Bowl. They had a rough season. They needed the last couple of weeks to win the division, but they did it, and they're here now. And as everybody knows, once you make it to the postseason, all bets are off. I do want to see Carson Wentz against the Seattle secondary because they're not anywhere close to the Legion of Boom that they used to be. So, but he's playing with these broken down weapons, and I have to check the injury report exactly for the Philadelphia Eagles. I'm not sure if they're going to have how many of those guys they're going to get back. I know they get Jordan Howard back, and that's going to be huge. It could be a day where the Eagles are just running all over them. That's what we saw the 49ers do, and that could be a similar tactic that we see deployed by Philly this weekend. They get Howard back. They still have Miles Sanders, who had a great run in Howard's absence, and then you had Boston Scott, who filled in admirably as well. You could see a three-headed attack here where they're keeping Russ off the field and just pounding away at a Seahawks defense that, again, is not what it once was. So that'll be an interest. I'm not sure where I'm really leaning. I think I want to go with the Seahawks on this one, but it's going to be in Philly, so it's kind of hard to not. And I think with the home field advantage, I have to go with Philly just off of GP. But this game is really a toss-up if it all comes down to it. Moving around the NFL in some non-playoff news, we do have a hiring. Riverboat Ron Rivera has been hired to be the head coach in Washington for the Redskins. I think this move personally is going to be great for Dwayne Haskins. Not necessarily because Ron is an offensive coach. He's not. He's a defensive-minded coach. He played linebacker. He was a linebacker here, with the Chicago Bears. But I do think that Ron will be an advocate for Dwayne Haskins. We saw this past year a lot of questioning from the coaching staff of Haskins' readiness and his ability to perform when they called upon him. But I said it then. That seemed to me to be more an indictment of the coaching staff than of Haskins. He's a rookie. I'm not sure what they expected him to come in and be able to do just because of where they picked him. You picked him there. He didn't pick himself. So I felt like that was a poor man's excuse. Again, it's a poor musician that blames his instrument, and that was what I felt like they were doing in that situation. I think Ron will be different. I think Ron will be a coach who will try to craft whatever offense he brings in, whatever coordinator he brings in. I think he will try to have him be able to craft the offense around Haskins' skill set. But the other interesting hire is Jack Del Rio in as defensive coordinator. That defense is going to be nasty. It's already a very solid defense. They need some work on the corners, but the front seven is really stout, and especially that defensive line. Ioannidis, Ron Payne, and you got Jonathan Allen. That's a really strong bunch, and it's only going to get better under Riverboat Ron and Jack Del Rio. I'm just surprised that the league might be taking a shift. I think that we might see it sooner rather than later. We've seen this passing take over, but we've also seen a lot of these offenses be more effective on the ground this year and kind of take advantage. The 49ers example, number one. Now, we'll see who ends up winning ultimately, but we already know. When you see a trend, it starts to be, it's usually one team that does a lot of things but takes the lead by storm. Now, if they get far enough, no matter what they win or not, they can get far enough. They can win a game or two. If they can win a game in the playoffs, you could see them, let them make it to the championship. You could see them definitely being a model for teams to try to copy their style of play after, where they play really, really good defense and they go run game. And now that's just opposite of what we've seen, where you got the spread out defenses to combat these spread out offenses. That's what happens. When people zig, you zag. And I just think that with what the talent now get, that whole approach currently depends on if they think that Adrian Peterson's going to come back. I don't think he'll be back in Washington. But then B, the recovery of Darius Guice, who just can't seem to stay healthy. They might need to find another back, but you know from the Carolina offense that Ron is going to want to have a strong ground presence. Just thought that was a really cool hiring because Dwayne Haskins is somebody that I'm cheering for, especially when I heard them dogging him like that. Coach, that's a sorry coach, man. That's bad. That's a bad look, and that's why they're out of there. Other talk around the league, free agent watch, Melvin Gordon, Shaq Barrett, Robbie Anderson, and Antonio Brown, Start with Melvin Gordon. We saw that the Chargers didn't do anything this year. They're likely going to lose Phillip Rivers. Now, will he retire? Will he come back? Who knows what he's really going to do, but it seems all but subtle that he won't be back next year. Will Melvin Gordon be back? He tried to do the holdout earlier. That didn't really work to his favor because Austin Eckler proved to be a capable back in this offense. I think that's something that could weigh on Gordon's contract elsewhere and might actually end up having him remain in Los Angeles. Now, in all likelihood, he's gone. I just don't know where he's going to go that's going to need him now. I would say the Bears could put money on, but he's going to want too much money to be of value here. Maybe he goes to Tampa Bay or Miami. I'm not really sure where else that a team that could use him. To be honest with you, though, it's not. Teams are finding running backs third, fourth round, and not really spending that kind of capital. He said it himself that it was it didn't work out for him, his holdout. So that's one to keep an eye on. Shaq Barrett I bring up specifically because I want to talk about him joining the Bears. If they can find the money, which Cutler and Floyd, Danny Trevathan, I respect you, everything, but maybe he has to go too. But whatever they have to do to find a way to get Shaq Barrett to be the bookend to Khalil Mack, make it happen. That is what has been lacking from this defense. Yes, Khalil Mack is a great talent. Khalil Mack is still one man, and when teams want to, they can focus on that one player, especially when none of the other players can even be remotely effective. That should tell you how ineffective they are. That we've seen him on tape repeatedly getting held, double, and triple teamed, chipped on almost every play, and yet and still no one else can do anything on a consistent basis. That's an indictment of their talent. And when you look at his auxiliary stats, the pressures, the hurries, and stuff like that, he's still doing what he's supposed to do. It's just the sack totals. And when people see that, they say, oh, he's having a bad year. If you watch closely enough, you know he needs some help. Shaq Barrett would be perfect. And I thought about it, saw suggestions elsewhere, just confirmed my bias that I already thought it should happen. If they can make this happen, they need to make it happen. Another one that if they can only get two, I know they're going to probably spend on offensive line, but if they can go and spend on two luxury items, it would be Shaq Barrett and then Robbie Anderson, the burner from the New York Jets. Now he's probably going to be way out of their price range, especially for a number 2 receiver who's been mostly a one-trick pony for much of his career. But that's a deep threat, and that his height with that speed would be dangerous to take the top off. We've seen this offense struggle to get some speed deep, and when they do, it's hard to hit. Mitch is not the most accurate, and we already know he'll be back, and I'll address that in a moment. But Robbie Anderson, with his height and speed combination, I think would be deadly opposite of Allen Robinson, who just does everything for you. Otherwise, go up and get it type of guy. I think that would be a good compliment. And then the last one that I wanted to talk about was Antonio Brown. Now, we know he still has that pending case, and he was likely going to be going on the exempt list if a team were to sign him during this season. But the season's almost over, and we heard the Saints tried to bring him in for a workout. They ultimately went another way, or they ultimately didn't sign him. But we also heard that there were other teams that were interested as well. So I wouldn't be surprised to see him resurface next year. Obviously, we have to get all of his legal issues worked out. But it just is. This has been an insane journey from him, from the Steelers to the Raiders to the Patriots to possibly the Saints to nothing, and doing rap videos and holding shows. It's just he was going to. Is he still going to college? Like, what happened? Is school out? I don't know what's happening right now. It's been a wild thing trying to follow and to keep up with him on social media. It's weird, but he almost is right, and the game needs him just because he is such a talent. We saw a lot of drops this season from wide receivers, and he went on the Twitter and talked about how he raised the standard, but in a way he's right, because we've seen athletes play up to the guy opposite them to try not to be outdone, and sometimes they need a standard setter. I'm not sure the game necessarily quote unquote needs him, but I will say that I think his impact was one that was sorely missed this year on the field. Off the field, it's a little crazy, but on the field, definitely. And we're going to wrap up the NFL section with the Bears stuff. They had their end-of-season presser. Matt Nagy and Ryan Pace sat up there and answered questions, and they gave you a mixed bag of GM coach speaking, a little bit of subtle honesty where you had to kind of read between the lines, but it was quite clear the message they were trying to send out. First things first, they backed Mitchell Trubisky, which was a blow to a lot of Bears fans. This felt more like, well, we have to give it one more shot because we're already in bed with this one, as opposed to we really think that there's a chance here of salvaging this. This is the age-old story of Chicago sports teams falling in love with their own pick, or just flat out being reluctant to move on and admit that they were wrong. Pace went all in with this one, and this could be a case where he was told from the top that you have to fix this or we're not giving you another shot to correct it. Because I've been talking about it for weeks now about how his track record isn't that great outside of 1 year. We do have to give him appreciation for the roster that he's built from basically scratch, because it was a torn down shell of a roster. But they've only had success that 1 year, the year where they were healthy, when the rest of the division was down, and they had a gang of turnovers, and they had a weak schedule. And now we saw them go 8-8, which is probably more along the lines of where they actually were last year, which makes sense when you think they didn't really improve in any area. So I think while they back him, I'm not sure if it's because they have to or if they really believe him. I want to say that they know that he's not the guy, which should alleviate some of the worry, but it kind of makes it more because it's like, well, now you're hogtied, which just means everybody going into this year is basically a lame duck. Mitch is probably gone because I don't see him improving, and if he flames out, that means the guy who picked him flamed out, and if he's gone, that means that the next guy's probably going to want his own coach, which means that Matt Nagy's out. I'm not averse to any of those things. I'm just saying that's what I see happening if this is indeed how it's going to go down. That has lent some credence to the talk of the Bears pursuing Alex Smith this offseason via trade. This is no disrespect to Alex Smith, but he hasn't had the best career in terms of actual production. People like him because he's been safe and he was a solid, steady guy. He's a nice guy, and he worked his way up from being thought of as a bust to being a serviceable starter in this league. And the common notion is if the Bears were to get serviceable, even average quarterback play, they would be a Super Bowl team. Even if you put Alex Smith on this team, I'm not sure it's better than that Chiefs team that he was on, and we saw how that ended. So I get the sentiment that this could be the best defense that Smith has played with, but it's far from the best offense. And if you're bringing him in hoping to be Mitch's backup, I think you run a serious risk, and mentor, I think you run a serious risk of him outplaying Mitch, and now Mitch's confidence being shattered. And we've already seen he seems to have had some very thin skin with some of the things that have transpired this season. So that's something I just don't. I'm not for Marcus Mariota. I feel like he's just a Hawaiian Mitch. My big acquisition would be Teddy Bridgewater at quarterback. I have one for every spot, but that would be that one. I just don't know what they're going to do. They backed Leonard Floyd as well, basically saying that they liked his overall game. They know he's not the sack artist that they thought he would be, but he's developed into a nice overall player. He's going to make about $13 million this year. That's a lot to pay for a guy who doesn't get to the quarterback very much, especially when we saw the struggles that it proved to be for Khalil Mack this year, not having that bookend guy next to him. I'm not sure why they want to commit to him like that on that number, but they have. This is, again, the Chicago teams not wanting to part ways with their draft picks because they're their draft picks. That's how teams stay mediocre and why they end up in the perpetual states of sorrow, something that I ended up talking about with the Bulls. And this is the part that kind of threw me off, though. This is what made me realize that they were backing Mitchell, because they didn't really say that they were backing Floyd, but you can kind of tell how much they were, aside from naming Mitchell, you can tell how serious they were. They were very open about the tight end and offensive line spots, that they were going to address it from a personnel standpoint as well as from a schematic standpoint. They already went out. Now, they denied knowing what they were going to make, if they were going to make any moves, but immediately as they went out and fired Harry Hiestand and Mark Helfrich, two moves that I'm supporting, and they replaced Hiestand with Juan Castillo. Now, you might remember Juan Castillo was named the defensive coordinator, oddly, of the Philadelphia Eagles a few years back. Two horrible, disastrous results. But he's a very well-respected offensive line coach, was offensive line coach for the Buffalo Bills this past year, and actually spent that time in Philadelphia he spent with Nagy. So they have some history there, and they hired him to be offensive line coach, clearly with the eye on getting better in the run game. My question about them with the Bears is, what we've seen in this brief time is that when they try to correct something, they often over address it in terms of they pay too much attention to where it becomes their sole focus, and they have blinders on to everything else. We saw with the kicking competition. Clearly there was some lacks, some miscommunication, some missteps, some lost time, something in the progress that they thought they were seeing from Mitch in the offense in the summertime that just never made it to the playing field until late in the year, and even then it was only sparingly. I'm not sure that this is necessarily going to fix it. Castillo had kind of faded into anonymity, but working with Buffalo, again, that was a pretty good running attack this year. Now, we'll find out if it's going to be simply a shift of the coach, or if it's going to be a scheme thing, or if ultimately it proves to be that it was personnel that was the problem. Because we were told before it was personnel, and it turned out to be not. Now, we'll see. People are saying, well, Castillo didn't have success, this, that, and the third, and he kind of had okay results. It was more the players. And they had Hiestand come in, and he was one of the most respected, and why would we think this one will work? Well, Hiestand came from college, so it's not necessarily the same thing. Mark Helfrich also came from college, and I think with Helfrich out, though, I think that kind of cuts the Mariota tie, which is probably why the Alex Smith one has gained steam. And I know I'm kind of backtracking here, but it just kind of clicked that's probably out of the window. And then the last bit of news, Eric Ebron sent out a not-so-cryptic tweet in response to the Bears announcing that they were allowing Mitch to remain the starter, or backing Mitch for the starter next year, sending out a smiley face. Now, they went to the same college, they crossed paths for 1 year, met up at the Pro Bowl last year, and Ebron's a supporter. And I saw a quick rush to support the signing of Ebron. Now, if it's a very team-friendly deal, 1 year, no guarantee or whatever, some kind of prove-it thing, I'm fine with that. But if they're going to pay him based off of what he did last year when he was in that tight end-friendly offense with Andrew Luck throwing the ball, and he was playing without Jack Doyle, who's the actual number one tight end, because Ebron's mostly a part-time player. And even when Doyle went down, Ebron still was a part-time guy. That's the thing people don't want to realize. I'm not sure that I'm comfortable with them throwing that kind of money that he's probably going to command probably going to rival and even exceed Trey Burton money for a very similar player. Limited role, what they are. Switching gears to the NBA, David Stern passed away on New Year's at the age of 77. And I was going to have a little diatribe, but I don't have too many specific memories. I was a kid watching them, and I was mostly caring about the players. I do recall David Stern just appearing to be at the draft every time and just seeming to be this guy who was out of place amongst the trees. And he always had this smile on his face whenever you saw him that kind of was like he was living the dream. So it's not a personal as much as like, looked like a guy who was enjoying what he did, and how could you not? Commissioner of the NBA. But a better read and a better in-depth way to get an understanding of who Stern was a read by Henry Abbott on True Hoops, and it just details, or not really details, but it gives you kind of paints you a picture of how the juxtaposition that David Stern was himself, the defender of Donald Sterling and guys like James Dolan who affiliated with people like Jeffrey Epstein, to the guy who founded the WNBA and was also a person who acquiesced to calls for a dress code. It's just he's such a weird figure, and it fits with the image that I had of him as a child, of this guy standing out amongst the trees who just didn't seem like he belonged, but yet seemed perfectly at home. He is a contradiction. David Stern was a walking contradiction, and you just saw a lot of that on the NBA today. So rest in peace to David Stern. A couple other quick notes. And as the NFL season has winding down, as the NFL season winds down, the NBA coverage is going to definitely kick up a lot more. We get a lot more in-depth stuff, a lot more team-by-team analysis and coverage. But a couple of quick notes. The 76ers, rumored to be interested in acquiring C.J. McCollum from the Portland Trail Blazers. The Trail Blazers are having a rough year this year. They are, after being in the Western Conference Finals last year, they are currently sitting at as I pull it up here, it always disappears on me. They're having a rough year, and it's been thought of that they are just not a good team anymore. Maybe Kendrick Perkins came out on Twitter and said that he figured, or it seemed to him like the Trailblazers don't enjoy playing with each other. Now, again, they went from being in the Western Conference Finals last year to being 14-21 this year and sitting in ninth place right now, 2 games behind in the loss column behind the San Antonio Spurs. He said it feels like they don't enjoy playing with each other anymore. Kendrick Perkins did. But losing, I could see why that. I could see them not enjoying all the losing, and that's coming off as them not enjoying playing with each other. I think what really happened, though, is that other teams in the West got better. Now, scoring in the league is down as a whole, so I don't really want to look at their scoring numbers, even though they did fall. But Dame and CJ are essentially doing the same. Their floor percentages, the shooting percentages are a little bit down, but not enough to cause this kind of a slide. But in conjunction with the team not really improving elsewhere, kind of just staying where they were. Remember, they lost Al-Farouq Aminu, and they got Hassan Whiteside in there, but he's not Yusuf Nurkic, and you can kind of tell that there's just a difference. It's just not the same team. But I don't think it's because they don't enjoy playing with each other. Despite the fact that I said they shouldn't pay both of those guards because they're too similar. I think it's just a matter of a lot of the other teams improving and them staying really close to where they were last year, which is enough for them to take a step back because the competition is that much better. I think you're seeing the results of that, and this is why I said they shouldn't pay, and a lot of people said why they shouldn't pay Dame and CJ, because you need some kind of diversity in your scoring and what they can do. You basically have the same guy in different packaging, slightly different packaging, and really not that different packaging between the two of them. And what we're seeing is the results of that. Like, Dame's has a career high in assists this season. So Melo's been killing. People trying to say, oh, Melo got there and they're losing. Melo must be toxic. They were losing before Melo. It's not that. It's just, like I said, they didn't improve enough when the rest of the West did. And I'm surprised they're hanging around as much as they are. I'm surprised it's as bad as it is, but at this point, I'm surprised they're still hanging around as much as they are. And we'll see. There's still a decent amount of season left. We're getting close to the halfway point, though, so if they're going to turn it around, they got to do it. They got to go on a little run before the All-Star break and then wrap it up down the stretch there, because it's going to be tough for them to cling on to that final spot or get back into the playoff chase. But the Spurs. I mean, it's going to be them and the Spurs probably for that last spot. The Suns are still hanging around the Timberwolves too, but it's probably going to be the Spurs and the Trailblazers. Those are the two best teams of those bottom groups, save for the Warriors, who we know have nobody healthy, that could make some noise. And the Spurs have been more in rumors about trading off parts than the Trailblazers have. So neither one seems to want to go to the rebuild route, but both of them seem to be heading towards it. And at least the Spurs, though, makes more sense because chronologically that team is about due. The Trailblazers ones just re-upped with their key components and immediately look like they're going to be having some buyer's remorse coming up in the coming weeks and months. The Bulls, check out PimpinAin'Easy.com. I wrote for the website about the Bulls' end of decade, and I didn't go full decade. Obviously, this season's still going. I started at the 2010 season, so that whole season, which actually started off in 2009. But from then to January 1, December 31st, actually, I talked about the Bulls and how they average a minus 185 in offensive rating. They've been in the negative relative offensive rating for 7 of the past 10 years. They, conversely, have been in the positive defensively relatively for 7 of the past 10 years. But the worst defensive years came during Hoiberg's tenure, and the worst offensive years came through the best offensive years, came from the beginning of the Thibodeau era, which, go figure that. We started talking about at length about how Thibodeau was great at the defensive side, but that offense used to struggle. They had some of their best offensive basketball, and they haven't been great at it since Vinny Del Negro. So, go figure that. Like, no one would go out and say that Vinny Del Negro was some kind of offensive mastermind, but he damn sure had them playing better than they've been playing of late. This is also their first year having a positive relative pace since then. That's terrible. One of the mainstay complaints about the John Paxson era is that they are a team that is defensively sound, but they've just never caught up with the modern NBA. Paxson wants to build a team that's built for the 80s and the early 90s and mid-90s. And the numbers kind of bear that out. They've been sound defensively. They've been close offensively, but they've just been a step behind the rest of the league. We see it this year. They've tried to change their approach a bit. We'll see if this is them coming around, but it just looks like more of the same, and like they don't seem to understand that the league is changing. You got to change with it. It's adapt or die. And right now, they're not adapting. The other story is Derrick Rose averaging about 25 points for the Detroit Pistons, who were looking to be trying to make a way to the playoffs again after making it last year. But them and the Orlando Magic, who I'll talk about in one quick second, but they are struggling, and it could be an opportunity for the Bulls to go and get Rose. He probably would cost too much for them to get, or some vital piece that they would need. But it would be great to see him do what he's been doing lately for the Bulls again. Now, maybe that's some kind of bad juju where he doesn't need to come back. Now that I think about it, maybe not. And the Bulls really need a floor general who can score. But if he's going to be a ball stopper, we know he's not afraid to find a shot, and Rose can still find the open man where he needs to. And I think if you 3 guard lineups with him, with Rose, Kobe, and Zach, that's nasty. So maybe it's time for a homecoming with Derrick Rose. And then the other one is an interesting story. Josh Jackson down in the G League for the Memphis Grizzlies. And he's playing well, and he said he's enjoying himself, finding himself. And I just wonder if that could be a low-cost option to try to fill that wing spot long-term. We know we're probably going to have Otto back, barring a trade. He's going to probably pick up that option, especially after missing so much time this year and playing poorly while he was healthy. Could Josh Jackson be an option that the Bulls bring in to try to bolster that position long-term, with the eye on keeping on developing him, maybe with Windy City, and then ultimately back up? They've had a pretty good track record of late of getting those guys back and forth and finding some guys from down in that level and bringing them back up to the NBA and utilizing them in proper way. So it could be one if they're able to find a way. Memphis probably wants to hold on to him, though. Jackson was the 3rd pick, I believe, in the draft when he came out. Had some off-the-court issues, but is really a real talented player. Guy to Kansas that I like a lot. Length, can handle the ball a little. His shot's been kind of janky, but his defense is pretty sound. When his head's right, he can be a really good player. That'd be one that, again, if the Bulls are at all interested in trying to find a way to bolster that position long term on the cheaper end, that would be somebody that I would look into. And then wrap it up, a follow up on our story from Tuesday night or from Monday night. The Kings forward Dwayne Dedmon had publicly requested a trade in the Sacramento Bee. Well, he's been fined $50,000. I told you that the NBA was investigating. That investigation concluded with him having to now go into his pockets for 50 stacks, turn those over. That's going to be something that I think every player should take note of. I don't know what he thought he was going to accomplish by that. If the agents are going to get fired, they're going to find a way to tax you too. I know it's your career and contract, but you don't think the NBA is going to try to stop any and everything from being out of their control? Come on now. I just told you about David Stern, and that story from Henry Abbott tells you about a lot of the control that the NBA tries to show. Just to go read that. True Hoop. But I just, when I talked about it last week or last episode, I was kind of surprised that he would go out of his way to do that. Like, it just seemed kind of odd talking to the paper when you could have easily gone to your GM and said it. Now, I get it. Your time is down. But I'm not sure that you were really going to be able to accomplish what you thought you were going to accomplish by saying it to the newspaper. Like, all they're going to do is publish it as rumor. Sources say. Who's the source? Oh, it's actually Dedmon. And then wrap it up with this one. I was talking about the Orlando Magic. The Bulls are actually back in prime position to go ahead. Now, they lost tonight to the Utah Jazz. Down the stretch of that game, they had an 11-point lead. But the Orlando Magic, the team who sits in A play right now, is going to be without forward Jonathan Isaac, for about 2 months. Now, they're going to showcase, probably in his absence, the player that I said the Bulls should try to target if they're actually going to make major moves, and that was Aaron Gordon. But without Jonathan Isaac, that team is much less versatile. They're much less of a threat because he's a key component to what they try to do. The Bulls could try to get their way into the eighth again. It seems like everything wants them to make it, but they just keep fighting it and not doing it. It stinks. I mentioned that the Bulls lost against the Jazz, and we saw them struggle from the floor again, a theme that's been happening all year. We could talk about them leading the league in steals and how they've limited opponents' three-point shooting, but they just can't seem to find offense. And I found it funny because the picks from last year, Wendell Carter had 18 and 13 and pretty much played. You could say he outplayed Rudy Gobert, but at worst, he played into a draw. Meanwhile, the NBA world was buzzing because off the bench, Michael Porter Jr. out in Denver went off for 25 points on 11 of 12 and 5 boards. And what I took away from it was, no matter what, Wendell is going to be viewed, and he is a solid player. He's a really good player, but Michael Porter Jr. has superstar written on him. And he hasn't been great this season in the limited time that he's played. He's been minutes have been up and down. You always have that injury worry, but you see the benefits of taking a chance on a player with superstar potential, because those kind of guys, when they do well, they get people excited. They can impact the mood of the team, and they are just a positive influence throughout the entire organization. And it's not meant to be a knock on Wendell, because like I said, Wendell, when they say that he's like Al Horford, I take that to a T, because his game might be boring, but he's very fundamentally sound, and he does a little bit of everything well. He doesn't do anything great, but he does everything well. But he's not Michael Porter Jr. And that, I think, is going to be the subject of my next piece for Pippen Ain't Easy. How Wendell is good, but he's just not. I know it's been limited. It's one game. But just go and check the stats. Check Twitter out and see the feed. And you can just see, you never see that kind of buzz for Wendell. Like I said, he's an Al Horford guy. He's going to blend in, and you need those kind of guys. And nobody will fault them for taking that pick. But it definitely was a safe pick. And you just have to wonder if ultimately they're going to regret not going out on that limb for Michael Porter Jr. despite the back injury that he had. He was sending a lot of signals that he wanted to be in Chicago. He used to wear the Bulls hat in the pictures and stuff like that. But ultimately they went with the safe guy. At the time, that was the logic behind it. But just that flash, that burst in the excitement that he was generating, that Porter Jr. was generating tonight, brought all of those immediate emotions back from draft night when they took Wendell. It was just like, no, you're letting him pass, and then they didn't trade back up to try to secure him later on. Kind of all just came rushing back, seeing Porter Jr. go out there and do so efficiently. That's going to do it for this episode of Triple Zeros. Follow me on Twitter at Josh G. Buck. Check out the Facebook page at Jukes Jumps. Check out the website, jukesjumps.wordpress.com. And check out the writings, Last Word on Pro Football, Pippen Ain't Easy, and of course the blog is jukesjumps.wordpress.com. Until the very next time, I'm your host, Josh G. Buck. Peace.